Hello, my name is Dr. Shin. I am one of the medical oncologists here at Loma Linda, and I was asked to tell a story about a time when I faced fear in my medical training or my medical practice. So I wanted to share a story with you about something that happened during my first year of medical school. So as you all are aware, between first and second year, you have a free summer. You're basically your last free summer of medicine where you can do anything you want, but a lot of people choose to spend the time doing research, and it's through the McPherson Society. And during my first year of med school, that was no different here at Loma Linda. And as everyone's gearing up to plan for research in the summer, people kept asking me, John, what are you planning to do? And I really had no idea of what I wanted to do. So I remember getting stressed out and trying not to think about that subject. Well, it just so happened at that time there was no life communities, but we had these EBM, evidence-based medicine small groups. And the faculty leader for my small group asked me at the end of one of our sessions if I had any plans for the summer. And having none, I told her, well, I haven't thought of anything. And she said, John, I actually run a lab on campus. And I really enjoyed working with you in our small groups. And I think if you had any interest in research, I think you could do very well in my lab. Unbeknownst to me at that time, she was one of the most successful researchers on campus. And she had a multi-million-dollar grant. And people were actually really striving to work in her lab. And she, being very successful, did not have any need for medical students in her lab. So she wasn't planning to put up a project with the McPherson Society. But when she told me, she's like, John, I have the perfect project for you. I think this will be a great way to spend your summer. I'm pretty confident that we can get at least 2 papers published as a result of the work that you do. I was super excited. And what would I say other than, yes, thank you so much. I'm very flattered. I can't believe that you would think so highly of me that you would just offer this to me. And she said, great, John, I'm looking forward to it. It's just that in order to make sure that I give the impression of fairness, I have to submit this project to the McPherson Society and give a presentation to your whole class. But just understand that when I do this, this project is for you and for no one else. So I was floored that this high-profile researcher on campus would be willing to take the time to give this presentation just so that I, a lowly medical student who knows nothing, could come work in her lab with her for a summer. So I thanked her profusely, and I walked out thinking like, wow, God just dropped this into my lap. This is amazing. Well, as the days started going by, the time came when she gave the presentation for the McPherson Society, and I remember as she's describing the details of the project and everything that it entails, my classmates, I could look around the room and I can see people were super interested. And I was just thinking to myself, oh, these poor fools, they have no idea that this is my project. And when this lady finished speaking, afterwards, like half of my class mobbed her, and they were all wanting to know how they could interview with her to see if they can qualify to be the student. And as I'm walking by, she just kind of looks at me and winks. And I'm feeling 10 feet tall, thinking like, I cannot believe that this is my project. So I'm riding on cloud 9, really happy about the fact that God just dropped this into my lap. When one day I find out that in the summer, they have this thing called a whole person care preceptorship that I could also participate in. Now, this is like a 2-month program where you learn how to conduct spiritual care, and there's didactics in the mornings and practicals in the afternoon. And it would happen at the exact same time that I would have to do research, so I couldn't do both. And when I learned about this preceptorship, I thought, oh, that's really neat. I wish I had known about that sooner, but because I'm committed to this research project, I can't do that. So, well, I'll have to pick up those skills through some other means. But have you ever made a decision in your heart and then realized that you had no peace? Because that's how I felt. And I couldn't get the thought of this preceptorship out of my mind for some reason. And one morning, as I was having devotionals, I finally had to give it up to God. And I said, Lord, I have no peace. I feel like you are telling me that I need to do this preceptorship over my research. And I really struggled with this because this lady gave me this research project out of the blue. It was a huge honor to be looked on so kindly. Her lab is a very competitive lab to get into, and she was guaranteeing me papers I can publish. It would look so good on my CV. It would set me apart from the rest of my classmates. It was everything that made sense for my future career in medicine. Everything about this made sense. And in my mind, I was like, well, learning how to conduct spiritual care is also nice and important, but I have the rest of my career to learn that. I can learn that slowly through the course of, second, third, fourth year. And but this research I can't do any other time. So obviously I should prioritize this research. It just made a lot of sense. And anyone I talked to about this, they just said, John, obviously you should take this research project and don't worry about the preceptorship. But I couldn't deny that my heart was under conviction. And as I wrestled with this, finally one morning, I gave it up to God. And I said, Lord, if you really want me to give this up, I'll give it up to you. And I'll go and I'll tell this lady that I'm not going to do her project. But if this is a huge mistake, then you need to somehow stop me and intervene so that I don't burn this bridge. And I was half waiting for some kind of confirmation that indeed this was me reading God wrong, and I was just thinking too much into it. But that confirmation never came. So I decided in my heart to fulfill what I promised to do, which is to talk to this lady and tell her that I wasn't going to do her project and I was going to do this whole person care preceptorship instead. And I remember that day when I went to meet with her in her lab. She saw me at the door and she was super excited to see me. She's like, John, come on in. Hey, have a seat. I was talking to one of my grad students about your project, and he proposed this idea, which is even better than what I had planned before. I think you might actually get 3 papers out of this project. And let me tell you why this is going to be so amazing. And she's outlining, I'll be working with mice models and doing microarray analysis, and I'll be doing this, learning a whole bunch of cool lab skills, working with some of her best postdocs and this and that. And as she's saying all of this, I'm just sinking lower and lower into my seat, thinking like, oh man, how am I going to tell her that I'm not going to do this? So finally she paused and she's like, John, what do you think? And I through gritted teeth, I was like, oh, I'm so thankful what you've done for me here. This sounds amazing. I don't think I can do research this summer though. And she just stopped and she's like, wait, excuse me? I said, I'm so sorry. Something came up and I'm not going to be able to do research. And so she paused and she was like, I'm very sorry to hear that, John. Can I ask you what it is that you'll be doing instead of research? And it was at that moment I wish I could have told her that I was being called to serve and be an assistant to a Nobel laureate somewhere, or, like the White House needed me, Instead, I had to tell her, well, I'm going to be signing up for this whole person care preceptorship. And she looked at me incredulously and she said, wait, you're going to turn down my lab so that you can learn to pray with patients? And I said, yep, that's right. And she said, well, John, of course you have to do what you think is right, but couldn't you learn this some other time? Because this is the only summer where you'll be able to do research like this, but it sounds like learning how to conduct spiritual care is something you could do anytime. And I was thinking in my head, I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I asked God too, and he didn't give me peace. And I wish I had a good explanation for you. So I didn't know how to explain to her. It was clear to her I was being a complete flake. And the disappointment was written all over her face. So she said, well, I'm very sorry to hear this, John. I wish you had told me sooner so I didn't have to go through the bother of submitting this project to the McPherson Society, but you understand I'm going to have to give this project to one of your classmates. And I said, I know, I am so sorry. This was not intended. This is something that just recently came up. And I could tell when I walked out of that room, I had burned a bridge with her, definitely. And I was like, Lord, I really hope I read you right. I feel like I burned this bridge. But you know what? Even though I felt terrible about about what had just happened, giving this up, about the fact that she was very, very disappointed with me, there was a burden that lifted from my shoulders because I felt like I was walking in the center of God's will. And that encouraged me and emboldened me to continue in this path. So I really wrestled with this about what was the right thing to do, and I was so afraid to let this thing go. But once I let it go, boy, the peace that filled my heart. And I was thinking, Lord, what do you have in store for me in this whole person care preceptorship that you really wanted me to give up this research to do this preceptorship? So finally, the time came, I did the preceptorship. And I wish I could tell you that it was life-changing and that God revealed some amazing things to me. But instead, it was just, it was nice, but there was no earth-shattering, life-changing event that happened. And when the preceptorship ended, I was like, Lord, I mean, this was nice and all, but why did I have to sacrifice my research for this? Everything I learned here kind of reinforced what I already knew and what I was already doing. And there was nothing here that really, substantively changed anything for me. So why was it so important that I do this preceptorship instead of research? And then the thought hit me. Maybe it wasn't so much the preceptorship, but the fact that this research had become an idol to me, and God was using it as a test of my trust in him to say, John, would you give it up? Would you give this up and trust me with your future? And I was reminded of the experience that Abraham went through. In his old age, God gave Isaac to Abraham. It was clearly God's gift to him. And then at some point, God said, I want you to go up onto that mountain and sacrifice your son, kill your son for me. And it made no sense to Abraham, I'm sure. He wrestled with this. He's wondering, Lord, you gave him to me. How could you ask for it back? How could you do this to me? This makes no sense. This is murder. And yet, at some point, Isaac had become an idol in Abraham's life, where Abraham was now, in his priorities in life, it was Isaac first and God second. And God was doing this as a test of Abraham's faith to see, are you willing to trust me even with the life of your son? Is your commitment to me so strong that you're willing to give up Isaac, the thing you love most in life? Well, at that time, this research project was my Isaac. And it was as if God was asking me, John, are you willing to give up that which is most precious to you? That which the world says is the most important and best thing you could do for your career? Are you willing to sacrifice that and test me to see whether or not I'm faithful in guiding you in your career? And I said yes. And when I made that decision, it set a precedent in motion in my medical training where now I'm relying on God for everything and I'm completely committed to him. I mean, compared to giving this research project up, the subsequent trials I faced in medical school were relatively easy. When God asked me to give something else up, I thought to myself, compared to that research project, this is nothing. Sure, you can have that, Lord. And so it set me in that motion of building this foundation of choosing to serve God rather than choosing to impress the world through my accomplishments. Instead of building my CV, I was spending my time building the ministries that God sent me to be involved in. So this is how I spent the rest of my medical career. And at the end, when I came to my fourth year to apply for residency, I had no impressive research on my CV. I had no impressive extracurriculars. It was literally all just ministry work. But it all painted a unified story of how spiritual care was important to me. And that's how I wanted to conduct my future practice of medicine. So I prayed that God would use my application to residency as a filter, that my central thesis of my passion for spiritual care and whole person care, that this will turn on the right programs and turn off the wrong programs. So I wrote my personal statement in such a way that highlighted this passion as a centerpiece. And in the middle of the personal statement, I wrote about this patient encounter I had that was super meaningful to me, that summarized exactly how I wanted to practice medicine in the future. And when I submitted it to the dean's office to review, the dean's office was very kind and said, John, this is a great application. This is a great personal statement for Loma Linda and caring. If you want to, however, if you want to be competitive for these non-faith-based programs out there, you might want to try kind of rewording your personal statement so that it's more palatable for a secular audience. And it's too long. It's 2 pages long. So you should take out this patient story, summarize it in a few sentences, and then keep it to 1 page if you can. So on the face of it, this is very good advice. And this is the kind of advice that you would expect to get from a dean's office. And it made a lot of sense to me, but it also deflated me because I was so excited to kind of put this foot forward as, my passion for whole person care and spiritual care as being the main reason why I'm applying into internal medicine and what I want to do. And now I have to change all of that. And I was like, oh, what a bummer. I have to kind of tone everything down. At that time, I was actually on a away rotation with a family medicine physician who was also a very strong Christian physician mentor for me. And he asked me how the residency application process was going, and I told him that this was going on. And he said, John, do you mind it if I review your application for you? So when he read my personal statement, he said, John, this is powerful. This personal statement is the only thing in your application that acts as a witness for those reviewing it. And I feel that you should not change a thing. I think you should submit this as is. And when he said that, it rang so true in my heart, and it confirmed everything that I felt was right about my application. And I felt emboldened to simply submit as is. And I'm not telling you guys not to listen to advice from your dean's office. Your dean's office is there to give you wisdom, which is very important, and you should really, really take it to heart. But there are times when man's wisdom falls short of God's plans for you, and when that happens, the Holy Spirit will let you know. And in this instance, I felt like that happened, where God said, I have other plans for you. Won't you trust me with your application? So that was another time when I had to struggle between relying on the wisdom, conventional wisdom of the world, the things that make sense in my brain, the things that everyone's advising me to do, or to trust the promptings of the Holy Spirit, which at that time doesn't make as much sense. And I decided, Lord, I trust you with my application. And if I don't match anywhere, that's completely on you. So I submitted everything. And to make a long story short, I interviewed at a lot of places, but the most memorable one was an interview at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And this was the time when we did in-person interviews. And so I remember flying out there. And as I was waiting for my interview, all of us applicants are in a room and we talk amongst ourselves, and people ask, hey, where are you coming from? Where else are you interviewing? And based on the programs that these other applicants are interviewing at, I realized that at least on paper, I was the least qualified person there in the room. I was like, Lord, what am I doing here? These people are clearly a league outside of mine, and they're applying to and interviewing at the top programs that I never received an invitation from. Why did I receive an invitation from this program of all places? And when it was finally my turn to interview with the program director, she said, John, before coming into the internal medicine residency, I was the program director for the GI fellowship here at Mayo, which was the best GI program, GI fellowship in the country. And she said, and so in my career, I've read a lot of personal statements, but yours is one of the best I've ever read. And it really, really moved me. In particular, that patient story you wrote about, I really resonated with that. I wanted to ask you about that. So we literally spent the entire time talking about that, about spiritual care, what it means to me, and my philosophy of medicine, and how it's a ministry in addition to a calling. And at the end of it, I found out that she was also a Christian. And when I finished talking with her, she said, John, we need you here. We need people like you here in this program, and I hope to see you here next year. And so when I matched to Mayo, I realized that God had opened that door for me, not myself. And that back in first year, when I was so afraid of giving up this research project, thinking, Lord, how am I going to be competitive for residency and all of these things? I had no idea at that time that by focusing on ministry and doing the things that God wanted me to do, that would one day impress this program director at the Mayo Clinic in ways that any research line item could not. And so I couldn't foresee that. And it was God's way of teaching me and showing me, if you trust in me, I will take care of you. Lean not on your own understanding. Acknowledge me in all your ways, and I will direct your paths. That's Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, right? So my challenge to you in the midst of all of this is that taste and see that God is good. Throughout medical school, he is giving you opportunities to put him to the test, to trust him with your career, with everything in your life, to lay it all on the altar. Give up your idols, whatever you have in your life that you're holding precious and dear, the Isaacs, if you will, that God is asking you to sacrifice to him, and say, Lord, there's nothing in my life so precious that I wouldn't give up to you if you ask me. And even if it meant that I had to fail and drop out of medical school, Lord, I will follow you to the ends of the earth. I will do what you want me to do. My career, my life is yours. Try exercising that kind of radical faith. Test God and allow him to write a story of faithfulness in your life, in your school, career, that will end up being the foundation of how you practice medicine and live your life.